Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Friday, February 14th, 2025. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Trump says military spending could be cut in half. So President Trump told reporters on Thursday that he believes U.S. military spending could eventually be cut in half and that he wants to pursue the idea as part of an agreement with Russia and China. He also said there was no reason to build new nuclear weapons. So, of course, this was music to my ears to hear him say this. So Trump said, quote, "At some point when things settle down, I'm going to meet with China and I'm going to meet with Russia, in particular those two, and I'm going to say there's no reason for us to be spending almost $1 trillion on the military, and I'm going to say we can spend it on other things. When we straighten it all out, then one of the first meetings I want to have is with President Xi of China and President Putin of Russia, and I want to say let's cut our military budget in half. And we can do that, and I think we'll be able to do that," end quote. So one thing here is worth pointing out is that the U.S. spends way more on its military than Russia and China combined. It's something like the U.S. spends more on its military than the next 6 or 7 or so countries combined. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI, in 2023, the U.S. accounted for 37% of global military spending. China came in second, but was still far behind the U.S. at 12%. And Russia was in third at 4.5%. Because you hear what Trump says. He says there's no reason for us to be spending almost $1 trillion on the military, even though when you work things out, you factor in other things, the U.S. spends well over $1 trillion on military spending, what they call national security spending each year. But the fact is that China and Russia do not spend nearly that much. They do not spend nearly $1 trillion a year on their military. So it would be funny if Trump's not aware of that, and then he learns this while trying to pursue this, and maybe that'll make him want to cut military spending even more. So discussing nuclear weapons, Trump said, quote, "There's no reason for us to be building brand new nuclear weapons. We already have so many you could destroy the world 50 times over or 100 times over. And here we are building new nuclear weapons, and Russia is building new nuclear weapons, and China is building new nuclear weapons," end quote. So what he appears to be referring to is the U.S. modernization of its nuclear triad, which is a huge project. It's just constantly being modernized, the different aspects of the U.S. nuclear arsenal, the nuclear triad. This is things like ballistic missiles, submarines, and bombers, and the actual bombs themselves getting upgrades. So just a total boondoggle for the weapons makers. And this current modernization that they're doing is expected to cost $1.5 trillion when it's done, over the next couple decades. And Trump also repeated his call to seek denuclearization with Russia and said that Putin had agreed to do so in a very big way. So Trump has previously claimed that he was pursuing denuclearization with Russia and China in his first term in office, but the U.S. also withdrew from key arms control treaties during that time. So we got to look at the reality of this. It's great that Trump is saying this, but is something like this really going to happen? Russia recently said that the outlook was not good for the state of U.S. arms control, as the last nuclear arms control treaty between the two powers is due to expire next year, and there's no replacement. On the other hand, you have Trump recently speaking with Putin, and it sounds like he's pretty determined to work out an end to the war, and that's going to be the first step, is the U.S. and Russia working something out over Ukraine, and then hopefully they can get into the arms control. So then again, on the other hand, Trump says some good stuff about this, but he also signed this executive order recently to make what he calls an Iron Dome for America, a huge missile defense system. And Russia is basically saying that that'll lead to a new arms race. And that'll be a huge price tag. That'll have a huge price tag. Missile defense is very expensive. And Republicans in Congress are looking to raise the U.S. military budget by at least 100 billion. Some want 150 billion. I think I saw some even talking about 200 billion. So hopefully Trump sees the reaction to this. A lot of people are very excited about this idea, and I don't know. But again, the feasibility is something like this really going to happen? I don't know. It seems hard to believe, but it's something to see an American president say something like this. And I think this is an idea that's kind of rattling around in his brain a lot, his fear of nuclear weapons. Because I've seen him say this a lot of times in a lot of the interviews he was doing on the campaign. I think he does really not like the idea of nuclear weapons. So hopefully that translates into him actually pursuing arms control instead of tearing up arms control treaties like he did in his first term. All right, so the next one here, Hamas says that it will release 3 hostages on Saturday. So Hamas said on Thursday that it plans to release 3 Israeli hostages on Saturday as agreed under the ceasefire deal, and Israel appears to have backed down on its demands for more captives to be freed. So the Times of Israel reported that Israel is preparing to receive 3 hostages on Saturday despite Netanyahu backing President Trump's threat that the genocidal war would be restarted if all hostages were not released. Earlier this week, Hamas said that it was postponing the hostage release, citing Israeli ceasefire violations, complaints that Israeli officials have acknowledged were legitimate. So one of Hamas's main gripes here was Israel blocking the tents and blocking the mobile homes from coming in. Yesterday, there was a Palestinian reporter who said that some of that stuff started to come in. And now another thing is they want construction equipment to start rebuilding, to start clearing the rubble, just making safe areas where people can be. And there's reports that dozens of bulldozers and caravans entered the Egyptian side of the Rafah border crossing, and they're expected to be allowed into Gaza. And Egyptian officials told Reuters that Israel would let the heavy construction vehicles into Gaza in exchange for the hostage release that's happening, in exchange for the hostages to be released on Saturday. But Israeli officials are denying this. A spokesman for Netanyahu said that there is no entry of mobile homes or heavy equipment into Gaza, and there is no coordination for it. So that's not really a good sign. The Netanyahu spokesman also acknowledged that Israel still has not begun negotiations on the second phase of the ceasefire deal, and the lack of talks on the second phase is actually a violation of the agreement. They were supposed to start the talks on the second phase on the 16th day of the ceasefire that started on January 19th, and that still hasn't happened. So that is a bad sign for the long-term prospects of this ceasefire deal. But from what I'm reading it seems like the hostage exchange is going to happen on Saturday. I think things will hold for now, but it's still very shaky overall. And it's just extremely fragile. Israel bombed Gaza on Thursday. They claimed that a rocket was fired from inside Gaza. But a source from Gaza's police force said that the rocket was an unexploded Israeli ordnance that detonated while it was being moved. And then I saw some other Palestinian reports that said that. And Palestinian media reported that a 14-year-old boy was killed by the detonated ordnance. And Israel claimed that it struck the source of the rocket launch in the Berej refugee camp in central Gaza. And the Wafa news agency reported that a 15-year-old was killed by an Israeli airstrike east of the Nusret refugee camp, which is also in central Gaza, very close to Berej. So it looks like two young boys, 14 and 15-year-old, were killed on Thursday. So the killing continues. And Gaza's health ministry, we know, they said on Tuesday that at least 92 have been killed since the ceasefire went into effect on January 19th. All right, so the next one here, Trump sanctions ICC prosecutor on behalf of Israel. So on Thursday, the U.S. Treasury Department announced that it had to impose sanctions on Karim Khan, a British lawyer who is the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, the ICC, and this is an action taken on behalf of Israel. The sanctions came after President Trump signed an executive order to target the court in response to the ICC issuing arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant over their roles in war crimes in Gaza. Under the sanctions, any assets that Khan may have in the U.S. have been frozen, and he is barred from entering the country. Khan has also sought arrest warrants for 3 top Hamas officials, but they were all killed by Israel. In his executive order, Trump accused the ICC of illegitimate and baseless actions targeting America and Israel. And in his first term in office, this isn't anything new for Trump, he sanctioned the ICC, the previous ICC prosecutor, for opening investigations into war crimes in Afghanistan committed by all sides, including the U.S. And the Biden administration reversed those sanctions, but it looked like they actually put pressure on the court. It was like part of the deal was we'll lift the sanctions if you drop the investigation, because then the ICC came out and said, oh, we're still going to investigate the Taliban and ISIS-K in Afghanistan, but not the U.S. So the pressure did seem to work there. But this is another matter here with Israel. I mean, it's just the evidence is just so overwhelming of what's happened in Gaza. It's right, and everybody can see it with their own eyes. And this is what the U.S. is choosing to do, is to impede these investigations. And, it's obvious why. It's because the U.S. is implicated on this. And, of course, the U.S. is against the International Court of Justice's genocide case as well. All right, so the next one here, explosive remnants in Gaza caused dozens of casualties. This is a report from Dropsite News from Abu Bakr Abed. He's a Palestinian journalist in Gaza. And according to this report, up to 10% of munitions fired by Israel into Gaza have failed to detonate, leaving behind deadly hazards for years to come. And he gets into some instances here where Palestinians were killed or maimed by these unexploded ordinances. And this is a really big problem. I mean, you see that rubble, if you're trying to dig through the rubble with some kind of excavator or whatever kind of construction equipment you have, I mean, not to mention the people looking through their things. This is about people looking through the rubbles of their homes to see what they could find. But I just mean, if you're doing a big construction project, there's no telling what's in this rubble if you're trying to clear it. I mean, I think there's just going to be so many of these explosions going forward. So go check that out. It's a good report. The next one here, Zelensky is not happy that Trump spoke with Putin first. So Zelensky said Thursday that it was not very pleasant that President Trump spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin a day earlier before calling him. He said, quote, "We've already had 3 conversations with President Trump, so I don't take this call as a priority for Trump that he spoke to Russia first, although it's really not very pleasant in any case," end quote. Essentially what he's saying is, I spoke, before Wednesday, before Trump spoke with Putin, he did speak with Zelensky several times, but he wasn't happy that, on Wednesday, Trump called Putin first and said, we're going to start negotiations right away. And then he called Zelensky. And Zelensky said, quote, "As for the conversation, he knows my thoughts. I really believe that Ukraine is the priority first and foremost. There is a war against us," end quote. So the call between Trump and Putin marked the first time in 3 years that the leaders of the U.S. and Russia held a publicly known phone call. And I looked it up. It actually happened to be 3 years to the day. February 12th, 2022 was the last time that Biden and Putin spoke. And it was exactly 3 years later, that Trump and Putin spoke. Trump did say they spoke before that, but this was the first publicly known call between the leaders of the U.S. and Russia. And the Kremlin, they had positive things to say about it on Thursday. And they're saying basically Trump and Putin, they both invited each other to their respective countries. But first, they're going to have a meeting in a third country. And Trump said it looks like it's going to be Saudi Arabia. Russia didn't confirm that, but they said that both sides are working right now to set up a summit, to set up an in-person meeting. And the reality is, if you want the Ukraine war to end, this is what needs to happen. It's going to be a negotiation between the U.S. and Russia, mostly. And Russia says that the U.S. is going to be its main partner in the negotiation. And they say, obviously Ukraine's going to be involved, but, we need to work things out with the U.S. And that's because their main thing is that they want Ukrainian neutrality. And, of course, now they also want the territory that they've taken over in Ukraine as well. All right, so the next one here, Hegseth says the U.S. will expedite weapon sales to Europe. So this one is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So, this is one thing there's this really big push by the Trump administration to get the European countries to really increase their military spending. And that kind of goes against Trump's whole thing, saying that he's going to work with other countries to reduce military spending. But this is another kind of boondoggle for the arms makers, for the Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and everything. They've already made out a lot on this. Just in the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, they have increased the military spending, the European countries, especially the Eastern European countries, and they're buying a lot of U.S. weapons, and Hegseth is saying that the U.S. is going to be expediting sales to Europe. So Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said that the U.S. will accelerate weapons deliveries to its allies in Europe. Initially, the proposal was made by NATO chief Mark Rutte and received mixed reviews from European powers. So Hegseth said, quote, "Foreign military sales is something the United States is committed to expediting the process of ensuring that our allies get what they need and when they need it," end quote. And Hegseth didn't exactly provide details, but he was at NATO headquarters on Thursday. There's all these stories about how NATO's scrambling. NATO's not happy about what Hegseth said on Wednesday about no NATO membership for Ukraine and all that. But he's, Trump's saying that they want these European countries to increase their military spending drastically. Again, another thing, it doesn't really jive with what Trump is saying about cutting military spending. All right, so the next one here, the UN says Israel must stop killing Lebanese civilians. So this article is from Jason Ditz. A group of UN experts have issued a statement on the ceasefire in Lebanon expressing outrage at Israel's flagrant violations, including the killing of civilians trying to return to their homes and the systematic destruction of those homes during the nominal cessation of hostilities. In the first 60 days of what was intended to be a 60-day ceasefire, Israel killed at least 57 civilians and destroyed 260 properties across southern Lebanon. 57 civilians, that is a lot. The number killed has only grown since the ceasefire was extended by the U.S. and Israel in late January, which means the occupation of Lebanon was extended. 24 were killed and 120 were wounded in a 2-day period when the ceasefire was supposed to be ending. So you had civilians going to return to their homes in these southern villages, thinking Israel would leave, but instead they were met with gunfire and they were killed. I mean, it feels like that barely got any attention, that this massacre of Lebanese civilians that happened just a couple weeks ago. And they've been destroying homes and residential buildings in the area. And the extension bumped the ceasefire and, by extension, the Israeli occupation of southern Lebanon up to February 15th. And now Israeli officials are saying, they're not leaving. They're saying they have the backing of the U.S. And they're saying they're going to retain at least 5 hilltop surveillance posts that they started establishing just in the last couple of weeks. So they're actually establishing little outposts here, which sound like military bases. So it's just a sign that this is not good. And there's Israeli media is reporting that the U.S. has agreed to a long-term Israeli military presence in Lebanon. So just a bit bad signs all around when it comes to the situation in Lebanon. All right, so the next one here, Syria says the Kurds will be excluded if they do not disarm. So this is another one from Jason. So the fighting between the Kurdish SDF and the forces of Turkey and its proxy, the SNA, continues apace in northern Syria with no signs of ending. Turkey targeted civilian infrastructure, leading to power outages and water cutoffs from 100 Kurdish villages in the north. Turkey's interest in Syria is driven by Erdogan's government's desire to tamp down Kurdish autonomy in the region. Turkey is pushing the new Islamist government to do more against the Kurds, and the Turkish Defense Ministry has offered to relocate Turkish armed groups into northern Syria to that end. So far, the al-Qaeda-linked Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is the new government in Syria, has not moved militarily against the Kurds directly. I think some of their fighters have been involved. But it's repeatedly denounced the idea of Kurdish autonomy and is stepping up the rhetoric. The Syrian government has issued a statement warning that if the Kurds don't agree to disarm and submit, they will be excluded from the meetings on national dialogue between the various Syrian parties. The meetings are meant to produce a statement related to the eventual creation of a constitution. The spokesman of that National Dialogue Committee, meanwhile, has insisted that the Kurdish SDF does not represent our people, and that only groups that the HTS believes do represent Syria will be allowed to participate. So Turkey's leaning on HTS to take action against the Kurds, it sounds like, and they do control a significant chunk of Syrian territory. If you see this map, the green is HTS controlled, and the orange is Kurdish areas. So they have a pretty broad swath of territory, and that's also thanks to the U.S. backing them. The U.S. has military bases in those Kurdish areas and also in other areas in the south. The El Tamf base especially is kind of the big one in southern Syria. All right, so the next one here, Trump. Oh, we went over this yesterday. Trump suspending funding to the NED. I figured I'd leave that up because that's a nice story. But the next one here is not so nice. Virginia Defend the Guard Act fails in the Senate committee. So on Wednesday, a Senate committee in the state of Virginia voted down the Defend the Guard Act, legislation that would prohibit the deployment of the state's National Guard to combat zones without a declaration of war from Congress as required by the Constitution. So this is a shame. This bill was introduced in Virginia for the first time this year by House Delegate Nick Freitas, and it unanimously passed through the House in a vote on February 4th. It blew through the House, so that was a really good sign, but it did not make it through the first hurdle in the Senate. So Bring Our Troops Home wrote on X, Bring Our Troops Home is the organization behind Defend the Guard. They said, quote, unfortunately, HB 2193 did not move past its Senate hearing in Virginia today. We witnessed remarkable progress for a first-time bill, with Defend the Guard receiving unanimous passage in the Virginia House of Delegates, end quote. So essentially how I understand it, what happened here was, it went through the House, and then the generals showed up, or there was pressure from the federal government not to pass this thing, and it was voted. It didn't make it past this committee in the Virginia Senate. In a vote of 10-5, they voted to shelve the bill, to kill the bill, really, not just shelve it, but just to totally kill it. So this is, that's a shame. And it's a shame. It seems like there's still pressure from, they send the generals in and they threaten these state lawmakers with funding and everything. And they say all kinds of crazy things. From people involved in Defend the Guard, one thing in Kansas, apparently a general told them, if you get this Defend the Guard Act passed, Kansas might be nuked, basically saying that they're going to lose their federal protection or something. That's the threat. In another state, I think in Montana, I might have the state wrong, they went up in helicopters, in state National Guard helicopters, or I don't know exactly who the helicopters belong to in the state, but the generals took them up in a helicopter and said, if you pass this bill, you're going to lose these helicopters. So these are the threats these state lawmakers get. So if there's no pressure from the grassroots and it's only the generals showing up, then these bills are not going to become law. The unfortunate thing is that Pete Hegseth has, well, I shouldn't say unfortunate. This is a good thing, and hopefully this gets to him. Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, has endorsed Defend the Guard. He did it when he was a Fox News host. And I remember thinking, well, he said it when he was, on Fox News, but he actually met with Dan McKnight, the chairman of Bring Our Troops Home, during the transition period, and said, yeah, and I endorse it. I support this legislation. So now the question is, is he going to really put, because he has the power to stop this pressure from the generals. He can issue a memo that would stop this. So hopefully that happens. But in the meantime, Defend the Guard needs volunteers. I always put the link for the phone banking in the description, and that's what it's about. It's about hounding these state legislatures and just, annoying them into supporting it. And I dropped the ball with Virginia. I didn't realize this was going to happen so quick. I mean, this was my state. I should have been calling. I mean, I contacted my senator, but it didn't make it to a full Senate vote, and I thanked my House delegate. But I mean, I should have done more than that. And so it's just something I got to stay more on top of. But go to defendtheguard.us to see if the legislation is introduced in your state. And again, if you want to volunteer, it's great anti-war activism. Click on the link in the description and put your information in there. All right. So that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Joseph D. Terwilliger: is Trump's plan to take Greenland to control Arctic shipping lanes? One from Ted Snyder: the isolation is over, Trump calls Putin. One from Eric Ross: repression versus activism, colleges crack down while Gaza solidarity persists. One from Nick Terse: Trump the peacemaker ramps up America's forever war in Somalia. Our spotlight from Anel Sheeline: Jordan's Abdullah is looking down the barrel of a gun. A good analysis about the situation that King Abdullah has found himself in. That's it for everything today. Next week, I'm going to skip one show. I think the last show of the week. I'm going to be in Florida working from my parents' house, but I'm going to take a little time off one night. Probably hang out on the beach or something. They're not too far from the beach, which is nice. But yeah, normal. Besides that, there should be a Monday through Thursday show as usual. There's been so much going on lately. I don't even really want to skip one, but I got to hang out with my wife on the beach one night at least. All right, so that is it for me for today. Please go like and subscribe, comment, follow us on social media, Instagram, X, TikTok. I'll be back after the weekend. I hope everyone has a good one. Thanks for listening.